Hello, everybody, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. My name is Gabe Gunning, and I have the privilege this evening of joining you all as your moderator as we welcome back my dear colleague, Ben Green. Ben has spent the past year split between Russia and Finland, getting a master's degree in Russian history and politics. And tonight he shares with us his experiences from studying in St. Petersburg, traveling around Finland and the Baltic states, and even fleeing from Russia on one of the last flights out of the country. Now, though, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to my dear colleague, Ben Green. Ben, we are so glad to have you back with us here on Monday Night Travel. Welcome back.
Well, thank you so much, Gabe. It's so great to be here. It's awesome to be back with you and Julianne, Lisa, and Rick, and all of our Monday Night Travel family. Thank you so much for inviting me here for this presentation.
And Ben, how long have you been back in the country for?
About 6 weeks now, Gabe. So I'm well adjusted and glad to be back enjoying the last rays of the Pacific Northwest summer.
All right. Well, we're very glad to have you back. I'm going to get out of the way and let you begin with your telling us about all of your adventures, but I'll see you at the end for the Q&A.
See you soon, Gabe. All right. Well, tonight I have the pleasure of sharing a snapshot of what I experienced in the past 12 months. You know, in some ways, I wasn't a tourist, but a temporary local, because in Russia, I was there for 4 months and I needed 2 separate student visas. And in Finland, I was there so long, in fact, that I needed to apply for residency. So what I share with you tonight will be a candid and very personal take on my last year. Now, I do have a few Finnish delicacies to share with you, and I'll start with the one which is not associated with any particular holiday. This is leipäjuusto. It's a type of bread cheese, is how it translates. It has a very particular texture, very flavorful. It's available in Finland throughout the year. In the US, you can find it, actually. This was in a local high-end supermarket. It's from a Wisconsin maker. It's often eaten with cloudberry jam. Very good. I also have tonight some home-brewed sima, which is a fermented lemon drink. And this has been sitting for a while. Delicious. And finally, joulutorttu, a type of Finnish Christmas pastry. Very good, jam in the middle. You'll be hearing more about sima and joulutorttu later. All right, we've got our food all set. So now I'm going to take you back to my previous year in Russia, Finland, and beyond. Okay. So this is not Finland or Russia. Just before leaving for Helsinki, I wanted to remember the majesty of my native Washington state. So my girlfriend Nella and we hiked up Mount St. Helens. It was an amazing experience. This is a hike, not a climb, but it was a final great adventure before leaving Washington for quite some time. You can look straight down into the crater. It's really incredible. So we're back to August 2021. The pandemic was in a different place and a test was required to enter Finland. Due to some confusion as to whether the test had to be 48 hours before my flight's departure or 48 hours before being examined by the Finnish border guard, I had to take a second test closer to my departure. But that's just what travel during COVID often involved. It was okay. And I'm very grateful for Finland, or to Finland, because throughout the pandemic, they had a very progressive policy of allowing me as someone in a relationship with a Finnish citizen to enter throughout the pandemic. And I gratefully took advantage of that. And I was so fortunate to have my parents and my sister join me at the airport before my flight and support me throughout this whole experience. My mom actually traveled with me to Helsinki and St. Petersburg on one of our tours in 2019. It was her first time outside the US, but she got to see and experience the places I was going to, and that made her feel a little bit more comfortable, I think. I flew Icelandair to Helsinki via Reykjavik. Only 1 out of maybe 10 seats was filled. Again, travel during COVID, but needless to say, I really enjoyed the extra space. This region of Europe, somewhat underappreciated, holds many worthwhile destinations. I spent most of my time in Helsinki and St. Petersburg, which are connected until recently, at least, by high-speed train, plane, and boat. For 2 months in the summer, Nella worked as a veterinarian in the town of Pitipudas in central northern Finland. This little burg is the smallest community I've ever spent time in. It gave me a good look at Finnish culture and nature, and very vigorous Finnish mosquitoes, which I'll talk more about later. So from St. Petersburg, I took a side trip to Moscow, and from Helsinki, I went to Riga and Vilnius. Helsinki is really a gem of a city. It has great transportation infrastructure, which makes moving around a breeze, although much of the city center is walkable. The White Nights in late June are a popular time to visit. This is when the longest days of the year occur, and even here in southern Finland, daylight hours stretch for 19 and a half hours. It's really incredible. At least 2 full days in Helsinki is ideal, I would suggest, maybe 3 if you have the time. In terms of reserving ahead, nothing much other than perhaps accommodation, some tours, if there's a special event you'd like to attend. And if you're going to a nicer restaurant, you might also consider reserving that ahead as well. The center of Helsinki, especially in summer, is its lively Senate Square, which you see here. Buildings surrounding the square were designed by the architect Carl Ludwig Engel, an appointee of Tsar Alexander I. He gave the square this neoclassical style. He also designed the Helsinki Cathedral that you see here. Helsinki was only named the capital of Finland in 1812, after Russia took over Finland from Sweden, and Finland remained part of Russia until its independence in 1917. Just down from Senate Square is Kauppatoori, seen here on a warm August day. There is a fantastic market operating throughout the summer and other times of the year as well. Finns love to get out and soak up the sun whenever they can. Many surveys have shown Finland to be one of, if not the happiest country on earth. But you wouldn't necessarily know that when viewing Finns out on the street. They have a certain slightly introverted demeanor. But however, I think that they have an inner contentment when focusing on things of quality in life, and their strong social safety net also provides some security. This is a country where taxes are higher, and even speeding tickets are based on income. A famous example occurred in 2002 when a Nokia executive famously received a speeding ticket for some 100,000 euros. I bet he wasn't expecting that. My favorite neighborhood in Helsinki is Kaivopuisto, south of the Senate Square, and Kauppatoori. This is where Helsinki faces its offshore islands. It has a beautiful park and waterfront promenade with gorgeous views, and it's one of the best places to be on a summer day. And certainly I spent many days walking along this shoreline. Kaivopuisto and neighboring Eira contain delightful and unique structures with vibrant colors. These gorgeous apartments and villas built around 1900 to 1915 represent the best of Jugend architecture, which is a form of Art Nouveau. Helsinki is home to Linnanmäki, the oldest and most popular amusement park in Finland. If you are traveling with kids or just enjoy a good ride, this is a great way to break up your sightseeing with something a little more lighthearted. Now, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of going upside down or spinning quickly, but to some extent, also Nella will partake in these kinds of rides. Here is an example of a popular Linnanmäki ride. She loves it. I stayed to the side and happily watched. I think she felt okay after, but there are more tamer rides as well, don't worry. A top place to visit in Helsinki, particularly in summer, is the scenic and historic Suomenlinna. It is an island fortress reachable by a short ferry with an inexpensive €3 ticket. It was a fortress for Finland under both Sweden and Russia, but now it's a great place to go on walks and a great place for history buffs like myself. Its winding paths allow you to see far out into the Gulf of Finland, as large ships bound for Stockholm and Helsinki gracefully slip through at times narrow island lanes. It's a gorgeous place. And here is a very fun Finnish cultural quirk: the outdoor gym. Even though they face a cold, long winter from November to March, Finland provides these outdoor gyms all over the place. I think you do see them in other countries as well, but I'm not sure anyone does them as well as the Finns. Whether it be a parking lot or in the middle of a forest or here on the island fortress Suomenlinna, there are outdoor gyms for Finns to get a little extra exercise. And as you can see, I also got a few reps in. Helsinki really thrives in June and July when the warmer weather really starts to ramp up. Summer festivals are in full swing and Finnish flowers are blooming strongly. Temperatures in the summer, even in this northern territory, get to around 70 degrees on average, and during warm spells can certainly go beyond that. A hidden gem of a museum in Helsinki's Kaivopuisto neighborhood is the house of Carl Gustaf Mannerheim. He served as the leader of the Whites in the Finnish Civil War, led Finland's military in World War II, and served as the country's 6th president. He is perhaps sort of the founding figure in Finland, and also perhaps its most popular figure today in Finnish history. This museum offers free guided tours with your entry ticket, and they've really preserved his home as it was during his lifetime. It provides an excellent, intimate look at the life and environment of early Finland for the founder here. Helsinki is a great biking city, and it has an excellent bike system. You pay around €5 for 1 day's use or €35 unlimited use for the entire summer. Not bad, I think. You do have to check in your bike at a station every 30 minutes, however, to make sure that you didn't just take it away. But there are stations all around downtown, so this is very easy. You just slip it in, it registers that the bike is, in existence, and take it out and continue on. It's a great system. By this point, after a few weeks in Finland, I had collected my Russian visa from the consulate and was ready to go to St. Petersburg via plane to begin my studies. I did need a PCR test to enter, which was no problem in Helsinki. I was unable to take the high-speed train, which exists and goes several times a day between Helsinki and St. Petersburg, because it was limited at the time to just Finnish and Russian citizens. Big St. Petersburg is a city of around 5 million people. That's almost the population of the entire country of Finland. It is huge, dwarfed only by the even bigger capital, Moscow. Its history as an imperial city and its influence on surrounding lands, including Finland, is really pronounced. Today, it is in some ways still a cultural capital, full of great museums and known for quality opera, theater, and ballet. Here you see my own little apartment room in a building which has undeniably Soviet decor. I shared this apartment with 2 of my classmates. It was in the center of the city, in one of the most desirable places, and my room was about $250 a month. So not bad by Western standards. By Russian standards, that's, I think, a fairly high price. On the first day of class at the university, just a 10-minute walk away, I was joined by 2 classmates as we celebrated the beginning of our master's study in Russian history. My dozen or so colleagues were from multiple different countries, and we had a great time. I became friends with all of them, and I'm so grateful to have shared this experience with them. We couldn't keep ourselves from the Palace Square very long. This is the center of St. Petersburg, not unlike Senate Square in Helsinki. This building behind us, now the enormous Hermitage Museum, houses a massive collection of European and foreign art. It was once the Winter Palace, home of the Tsars from around 1760 to 1917. This museum, let alone the building itself, is incredibly grand and huge. Altogether, the Hermitage, which includes other buildings as well, houses 3 million pieces in its collection, meaning you'd be there for half a decade if you spent 1 minute looking at each piece. But this is Russian imperial opulence for you. The Grand Jordan Staircase highlights the grandeur of Imperial Russia, at least for its elite. It is an incredible experience to enter the Hermitage via this staircase, just as royals often did. St. Petersburg is first and foremost a city founded by Peter the Great in 1703 on marshy land. It was built largely with peasant labor. Peter was nevertheless a progressive czar in some ways, and he sought to modernize and Europeanize the country. St. Petersburg was to be his window to the West, and his successor, Catherine the Great, had this monument to Peter constructed in an attempt to cement her own connection to the great czar. A horrific period in St. Petersburg's history came during World War II, which is referred to as the Great Patriotic War in Russia. Leningrad, which is what St. Petersburg was named during the Soviet period, was surrounded and sieged for 900 days. More than 1 million died, mostly from starvation. My interest in Russia and this city began with a friend who served as a sniper and nurse in the siege. I grew up hearing stories of her life in the early Soviet Union, and it inspired me to learn more. This is a powerful memorial to that horrific period in the city. And if you'd like to read more about the siege of Leningrad, I would recommend my friend's book. It's entitled Shurik, and the author is Currer Wayne. I believe Julianne graciously put a link to the book in the chat. The history of Russian-American relations is really fascinating. I actually took an entire course on it in St. Petersburg. For much of the imperial era, relations were actually quite good. Thomas Jefferson, as president in 1804, began writing personally to Tsar Alexander II. The absolute autocrat of Russia and the American president were actually quite fond of each other. I analyzed this correspondence for a term paper, in fact. It was during this period when official diplomatic relations began, and John Quincy Adams, the future president, served as the first American dignitary. This is the grave of his infant daughter, who unfortunately died during his service in St. Petersburg in 1812. We knew her plot was somewhere in this cemetery and almost gave up our search, when at last we saw the American flag and we knew we had found her plot. Back to imperial opulence for just a moment. We did manage, in the midst of classes and quite a lot of assignments and research, to visit Catherine's Palace, a fine example of Rococo architecture in Tsarskoye Selo, about 20 miles south of St. Petersburg. This was the Tsar's summer residence. It has a stunning interior as well, and is a particularly famous building for its room decorated with amber. While around 90% of the Russian Empire was peasants, or were peasants, the elite, as you can see, lived amazingly lavishly. Just a 15-minute walk from my apartment was the Church on Spilled Blood. It was constructed in the 1880s in dedication to Tsar Alexander II, the Tsar whose statue was actually on the square in Helsinki, the square we saw earlier. He freed the Russian serfs from bondage in 1861 and issued a variety of reforms. Alexander was assassinated on the spot of this church in 1881 by the political group Narodnaya Volya. For years, Alexander had escaped their assassination attempts. They tried to bomb his train, which they did, but he was on a different one. They bombed the dining room of the Winter Palace, but he wasn't there. He was late to dinner. About a dozen people were killed. But finally, in 1881, they placed a bomb below his carriage, where this church now sits, and it went off, but he was unharmed because the carriage, horse-drawn carriage, was bulletproof. But he famously, unfortunately, stepped out, and another bomb was placed at his feet, and he unfortunately died. Fall comes early in this northern territory, but the colors are spectacular. This is October 2nd in the summer garden, also a short stroll from my apartment. This garden was also a creation of Peter the Great. He hired many foreign architects and designers, and this was the first garden in many ways to be constructed for social activity and events rather than for purpose, for growing things, which is the way gardens were used in all times previously. St. Petersburg is also famously called the Venice of the North. Canals run through much of its core center. A must try, and something I'd recommend experiencing in your own city or when traveling is Georgian cuisine. When Georgia was part of the Soviet Union, many Georgians migrated to Russian cities for work, and restaurants in recent decades have sprouted everywhere. It is absolutely fantastic food and extremely popular in Russia today. On the right, we have inkali, which is a wonderful dumpling. On the left, hachapuri, a kind of bread cheese. And then in the back, you see a green drink. This is a soft drink made from tarragon. It's absolutely fantastic. A little unusual for us, but very good. On a few occasions, my friends and I got together to play, yes, that's right, Rick Steves Bingo. If you haven't tried it, the link is in the chat for you to give it a go when watching an episode in the future. It was really a lot of fun. Russians really love their theater and opera. As the weather turned colder, this was a great evening activity. This is the old Imperial Theater, the Mariinsky in St. Petersburg, where I had the pleasure of seeing several operas. Just to the left of this image is the Tsar's booth, where they saw the various spectacles here. Tickets, by Western standards, are quite affordable. This is one of the most high-profile venues in the country, but I probably paid an average of $20 per ticket. The best theater and operas in St. Petersburg, I think, are Russian performances. This is a scene from an opera I will never forget, Ruslan and Ludmila by Mikhail Glinka. The set was exceptionally vibrant, the costumes gorgeous, and the voices very strong. We were all impressed by the beauty of this story and its setting in Kievan Rus, which is the Slavic state around the year 900 based in Kiev, which existed well before Moscow was even thought of. And it's the state where Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine all trace their historical and cultural roots to. And it's the state where Orthodox Christianity first entered Eastern Europe. In Russia, as a foreigner, making sure you complete necessary paperwork and legal requirements is important. Due to strict visa requirements, I needed a new passport for my second visa. With declining relations with the US, the American consulate in St. Petersburg had closed some years before. So therefore, I had to travel to Moscow. But luckily, there was a high-speed train called the Sept, which traverses the rather long route in just about 4 hours, which is not bad because it really is quite a significant distance. And luckily, I have a wonderful friend, Kasusha, in Moscow. She went to the University of Washington with me for 4 years and returned to Moscow last year. She met me each day I was there and served as a brilliant local guide. This is in front of the famous Bolshoi Theater. One of Moscow's finest qualities is its metro system. The Soviet Union valued urban public transportation, and Moscow's metro, which was built beginning in the 1930s, was a showpiece. Different stations have different decorations, and some of them unbelievably ornate. Here is another station, completely different from the last. Fine mosaics can be found in some stations, such as this one. This mosaic says Mir, which means either world or peace. Soviet propaganda, particularly for foreign visitors, who were increasing in number following the Khrushchev thaw in the late 50s, sought to portray the Soviet Union as a peaceful state. Naturally, on our tour with Kasusha, we ventured through Red Square and pondered all that had taken place here through the centuries. In my opinion, Moscow has more diverse architecture than St. Petersburg. A much older city, its roots go back to medieval era and its architecture often more traditionally Russian. It was luck, fortune, and good skill that the leaders of Moscow were able to conquer surrounding principalities, mainly in 14th and 15th century, and become the center, the largest city. Moscow is a cosmopolitan city and it's constantly on the go. This is the view from the Central Children's Store, which is just a large shopping mall for kids. Pedestrian shopping streets, which surround the Kremlin, even then in October, were carefully decorated. You can sense that this is a comparatively wealthy and well-maintained Russian city. Salaries are higher than in most of Russia, and the gulf with the provincial cities is quite significant. One of the Soviet staples of Russian cuisine and a way to eat fast and cheaply is the stolovaya, a type of cafeteria. Kasusha and I went to one of the most famous in Moscow. They serve traditional Russian fare from borscht to other basics like chicken and potatoes, and stolovaya are all over the place in Russia. On my last morning, we did visit Lenin's tomb. Lenin had a cult of personality in the Soviet Union, and after he died in 1924, His body was put on display and preserved. Now, Russians are not always ones to trust their government. They seem to be able to judge when a law will be enforced and when a law will not be enforced, and then decide how to act. You know, during my time there, masks during the pandemic were not enforced at all, and many Russians did not wear masks. I was very much used to wearing one. I wore it in Finland most of the time, and of course in the US as well, we had similar restrictions. But in Lenin's tomb, oddly enough, they did fiercely restrict masks, which many Russians before and after me in the line were really not big fans of. I don't know why only in Lenin's tomb they enforced masks. I mean, Lenin certainly wasn't going to care anyway. Returning to St. Petersburg and preparing to leave after finishing the first semester, my wonderful roommates, Jonas from Germany, Frederick from London, and I celebrated with some ice cream. They were fantastic roommates. We traversed the challenging Russian bureaucracy together, and the two of them speak Russian at a very advanced level. So they were very helpful to me when I needed a translation of something or help understanding my paperwork. So after my first semester in St. Petersburg, I returned to Helsinki just in time for the Christmas market. This was an unusual time actually. You know, Finland was really pushing the EU COVID pass at this moment, but not being a tourist-oriented country, for some time they did not recognize the American CDC card, which I think is in contrast with some countries like France and others. The Helsinki region also did not choose to allow those vaccinated abroad to get the EU pass. So I was stuck. And so was Nella, because even though she is Finnish and was vaccinated with an approved vaccine, because she received them in the US, she was not able to enter restaurants or do many other things. Fortunately, these restrictions did lessen with time. And actually, when we went to the Christmas market, they were checking, even though it's outside, they did require the EU pass, but Nella spoke to the gentleman who was checking our passes, and he kindly let us in, fortunately. Helsinki has a very pleasant Christmas market, many excellent crafts, warm hand-knitted clothing, drinks like glöggi, which is a sort of mulled wine, little restaurant stalls with places to eat. Speaking of Christmas, it's time to share a bit more about my second Finnish treat, the joulutorttu, the sort of Christmas pastry. It has a nice buttery jam, or buttery dough, and a firm jam, most commonly prune, put into the center. This treat is very easy to make, and I think it's something you might like to see how to produce because it's so simple. So we're going to watch this short video. This is a sheet of defrosted puff pastry, and you just cut it into a 2-inch by 2-inch or maybe 2.5 by 2.5 inch square. You take a knife and slit about 3/4 in from each corner into the center, but not all the way. And then you take each corner and place it into the center, skip a corner, place the next one into the center, and continue all around until that's done. And that's it. So it's very easy. You can make the dough yourself, but the puff pastry makes it so very simple. It produces a nice pinwheel or star shape. And then you take some nice jam. This is actually the prune jam they use in Finland that I brought home. But if you have a firm jam that doesn't have too much water content, that probably won't spread in the oven, you can use that and put it in the center. And it's a very easy Christmas treat. To get out of the December cold, I finally decided to visit Atheneum, the National Art Gallery. It is now currently closed for renovations until 2023, but it's an excellent museum. I recommend a guided tour, which is included with the entry ticket. The rise of Finnish art in the 19th century is really impressive, and the museum houses some fantastic European pieces as well. The painting you see here is from 1893 by the artist Jarnefelt, and it's a criticism of labor conditions in the Grand Duchy of Finland. It shows heavy labor in the Finnish countryside by peasants who only received wages if the harvest was a success. It is a commentary on the potential for inequitable distribution of work and profit. Now, I am sharing with you a few great Finnish treats, yes, but I'd like to share a very popular way to eat out in contemporary urban Finland, and that's the sushi buffet. All you can eat sushi, of good but not exceptional quality, I'd say, for around 20 euros. Yes, you heard me correctly. And it includes a soft drink, often ice cream for dessert, and some salad. Not bad, not bad at all. Finland became independent from Russia in 1917, and its Independence Day, December 6th, is marked by many festivities, including a student parade. Student culture is extremely strong in Finland. Each department or student group marches together in the parade. I joined Nella and her veterinarian friends for a 1.5-hour march through Helsinki. It was something like 5 degrees, but oh, the experience was so worth it. They even handed out torches to us to use as we marched down the street. At the end of this parade, after walking past the presidential palace and waving to the Finnish president Niinisto from his balcony, we arrived at Senate Square, listened to a speech from Helsinki's mayor, and enjoyed traditional Finnish songs from a local choir. This is from the Finlandia hymn. The lyrics are roughly, "O Finland, arise. You showed to the world that you chased away slavery and you never gave in to oppression. Your morning has dawned, O fatherland." And it's basically about Finland leaving Russia and forming their own nation. It's a really beautiful song. A few days after Independence Day, I flew home to Seattle for about a month. It was great to be back and spending time with family and friends for the holidays. And then in mid-January, I returned to Helsinki once again. Finland's long winters receive a little bit of relief from the brightness of the snow. It reflects any light, whether it be from the sun or the moon. It also dampens the sound and makes things beautifully quiet. This is just outside Nella's apartment, about 30 minutes from downtown. And cross-country skiing, as you see here, is also quite popular. Finland, at least Helsinki, and I presume other municipalities, maintain certain trails specifically for skiing. Okay. This is the sauna, or should I say sauna, an essential Finnish pastime. I do suggest you visit a sauna, either one in your hotel or one of the public options when visiting the country. It is especially pleasant to warm you up in winter, and I always feel so refreshed and relaxed after a session in the sauna. You could do, if you're really daring, as the Finns do in wintertime, and in the middle of your sauna experience, jump outside and roll in the snow, or jump in ice water and then head back in to the sauna. And no, I did not do that. I am not brave enough, I'm afraid, but you could give it a try. Back from my second semester in St. Petersburg after a few weeks in Helsinki, Russia was rolling out their own requirements for vaccination to enter shops and restaurants. Russia does not recognize Western vaccines, and their own vaccine, Sputnik, is what is required. And I did receive Sputnik, and this is the certificate of vaccination from COVID-19 that they issued me after my official vaccination. Two of my friends, one weekend in February, joined me for a short trip to the city of Viborg. It's close to the Finnish border, and it actually once belonged to Finland. This is the historic castle in the city. It was on this trip that the situation on the Ukrainian border was getting more tense. After returning to St. Petersburg, I told myself that if Russia does invade Finland, I will leave the country immediately. So now I'd like to share what happened next by reading to you a little passage from my journal. Keeping a journal is a great thing to do, by the way. It helps you preserve memories from your travels in great specificity. And of course, it's great for history and posterity as well. So this is a passage from February 27th of this year. I'm finally feeling rested enough to write. Events of the past 2 days have sapped my energy. 3 days ago, on Thursday morning, I awoke and noticed my dad had called. He might have forgotten about the 11-hour time difference, but something made me feel anxious. I reluctantly went to check the New York Times, and it hit me. Russia invaded Ukraine. I was done. The consuming Russian bureaucracy had already tested my patience, and now I knew it was time for me to leave, regardless of its consequences on my program. I booked a flight to Helsinki for the 26th and began packing my bags. 2 days later, with 3 hours left until my flight, I called a taxi and was shocked to see that the drive time to the airport was twice as long as usual. St. Petersburg's traffic had struck again, and it's a city of 5 million people, so that happens, of course. Hopping in my taxi, I greeted my driver, who was a very nice Armenian man named Stepan. As expected, the traffic was fierce, and I was getting worried. After about 20 minutes, we drove onto the expressway, and I instantly turned white. We were going the wrong way. Stepan quickly realized this, but we were crossing the Neva River in stop-and-go congestion, and there was no way to turn around for quite a while. By the time we exited, it was clear I'd missed the flight. While my own personal safety was not in immediate jeopardy in St. Petersburg, I did not want to spend another minute in this belligerent invading country. Some of my Russian colleagues were arrested after attending anti-war protests, and we were told to keep a very low profile and avoid gatherings. Stepan, expressing his apologies, offered me a free meal at his family's Armenian restaurant, and upon reaching my apartment, pulled out a giant bottle of vodka from his trunk. I happily took it and had a drink with Frederick and Jonas, who was surprised to see my attempt to leave the country had failed. Finnair moved me to a flight the next day, for which I arrived several hours early. Talk of canceling flights between Finland and Russia were in full swing, but it was likely mine would take off before such a move was made. The Russian border guard, as always, gave me a thorough examination and questioned why my final destination was Helsinki and not the United States. After a few minutes, they were satisfied and I was free. The plane, completely full, took off on time. A clear day, I stared out the window as we crossed the Russian lands closest to Finland and was able to identify some of the towns along our route. Little did I know that there would be just one more flight that evening before Finland banned Russian aircraft. So that's a little bit about what happened when I exited the country. I knew it was the right time, and in fact, I did it before any of my other colleagues did, but they all eventually did leave within the next 2 weeks or so, I would say. Right, so we'll just continue on here with what happened next. I said goodbye to St. Petersburg and hello to Helsinki. I continued my studies virtually, and Nella graciously welcomed me to stay with her. So for that, I'm really grateful. Now, this is March in Helsinki. Yes, still cold. Nella and I decided to enjoy a favorite weekend trip beloved by Finns, the overnight ferry to Stockholm. The main entertainment of the evening on the boat, a few different bands and dance groups, brought us down to the dance floor several times. There's a nice bar and a handful of restaurants, including a large popular buffet. It was a great time, and for decades, this has been a popular experience for Finns to take the overnight boat to Stockholm, have a day in Stockholm, and then take the overnight boat back to Helsinki. So now we are in mid-April. This is a picture from mid-April, believe it or not. It was a bit above freezing, but it takes time for all that snow to melt. I was really ready for spring, I'll tell you that much. It was time for a side trip to somewhere at least a little warmer. I've always been fascinated by the Baltic countries, other than perhaps Tallinn, Estonia. They really don't receive a whole lot of attention, at least by American travelers. I wanted to visit and see them for myself. So this is Vilnius, capital, the largest city of Lithuania, as seen from Gediminas Castle Tower. Lithuania is the southernmost Baltic state. It's today a relatively small country, but it has a big history. At one point, it was one of the largest countries in Europe. In the 13th century, Lithuania fought a war with the Teutonic Knights, a crusader group in northern Poland, and Lithuania expanded and took territory in Kievan Rus, which includes a lot of contemporary Ukraine, the early Slavic state that I mentioned earlier. Vilnius has a Central European feel, perhaps in part owing to its history and actions to the south. It is a clean city with inviting squares and numerous museums. I only spent a few days here, which were partially taken up by virtual classes, but the relatively high level of English and low prices were major pluses. It's definitely a great destination for those looking for something not quite as popular. A few hours from Vilnius on the bus is Riga, the largest city in the Baltics at close to 700,000. Its history is also long. It was a major trading and merchant city for centuries, and also a member of the old trading union in Northern Europe, the Hanseatic League. Pictured here is one of the old merchant guild houses. Riga's population really exploded in the early 20th century, and a large portion of the architecture from that period was done in the Art Nouveau style. Riga has more Art Nouveau than any other city in Europe, and 1/3 of its buildings, in fact, are in this style. They're very impressive. I was in Latvia during Easter, and on Easter Sunday, my roommate from St. Petersburg, Jonas, who had moved to Riga following the invasion of Ukraine, joined me along with his Latvian friend Laura. We traveled by train to the town of Sigulda, and what awaited us there really surprised me. We started with a hike through the Gaujas National Park, a beautiful area along the Gauja River with hills surrounding it. There are a few historic stone castle ruins, along with villas once owned by the wealthy Baltic German nobility, which managed these lands during the Russian Empire. It in some ways reminded me of a mini Rhine River, for those of you familiar with that area in Western Germany. The Baltic countries, 30 years past their own independence from the Soviet Union, expressed their support for Ukraine in many ways. Ukrainian flags were everywhere. This was true for both Latvia and Lithuania. Now, I think of Easter as a private holiday, but in Sigulda, the opposite was true. After our hike, we found an adventure park, a luge ride, and this lift, all functioning with eager families out enjoying the holiday. Naturally, we took the lift and enjoyed the luge down. In fact, there was an entire fair and Easter market. A handful of rides, along with many food and craft vendors, were a real treat. But what was really fantastic was learning about particular Latvian Easter traditions. Scattered throughout the park where this festival took place were these swings, decorated with a variety of items, and Latvians, young and old, were lining up to give them a ride. This is Jonas here getting some decent elevation. Now, why is this associated with Easter, going swinging? Well, Laura told us it's because Latvians believe if you swing enough around Easter time, or perhaps just on Easter Day, I'm not sure, you are less likely to be bit by mosquitoes come summertime. So it's a very important preventative measure in Latvia. We'll just say that. Easter decor was everywhere. Here at Sigulda train station, we see more swings and these wooden ramps. Laura shared with us that kids set eggs at the top of the ramp and watch them roll down. Sometimes they will even have egg races. I was truly captivated by these unique Easter traditions. Latvia left me wishing I had more time to see more. Riga felt impressively cosmopolitan, and Latvian nature is likewise very beautiful. I'd love to go back. In Helsinki, my virtual studies were coming to an end. I was finishing sort of the beginner Russian level and entering intermediate. This was the start of my final paper. Russian Cyrillic cursive writing was actually not that difficult to learn. I enjoy writing in cursive Cyrillic, and it now influences a little bit, at least, of how I write in English. I'm currently taking Finnish courses once a week, and I think Finnish is the more challenging language to really learn well compared to Russian. So it's time to mention sima again. I'm enjoying some of this home-brewed sima here, really just wonderful. I had some before we started too. It's tangy, sweet, and refreshing altogether, and mine has been, as I said, I think, fermenting for quite a while. It's associated with the holiday in Finland called Vappu, which is on May 1st. This has been a holiday for centuries, but in recent decades, it's become associated with labor rights, students, and the beginning of spring. Starting on Vappu Eve, excited and celebratory Finns gather at the end of the Esplanade, which is one of the main streets in central Helsinki. This is very near Kauppatori, which we saw earlier. And here they are, young Finns, piled onto a tram stop. Notice what these students are wearing, and I think they are students because they're wearing overalls. often worn as pants only. These overalls can cover the entire body, almost like a wetsuit. Each department at Finnish universities have different overalls of a variety of colors. Students add patches to them throughout their student careers, and they're worn for special events like Vappu. As the evening approaches, the crowd forms around a female statue at the end of the esplanade. A few select students fly high on the crane you see there in the foreground. So let's take a listen now to the sounds and scenes of the celebration. The sense of joy and fun that this outdoor party exudes is unlike anything else I've ever participated in. It's nothing less than a really good time. At 6 p.m. sharp, a white cap is placed on that statue. Then everyone raises their own caps and puts them on in merriment. The white caps are given to high school students in Finland and are often kept for the rest of their lives, coming out for special occasions. Although my own noggin was one of the few that was bare, I had no problem, of course, joining Nella for plenty of sima. The following morning, there are parades in Helsinki. This is Vappu Day now. Our bus could not proceed any further when reaching the side of the parade, so we hopped out and walked through downtown ourselves. Our goal was to reach Kaivopuisto Park. See, we're in Kaivopuisto again. No wonder it's my favorite neighborhood. Here, a massive gathering takes place. People bring food, lots of sima, and celebrate the coming of spring. Nella and I found a nice sunny spot and enjoyed a picnic. And Nella actually hand knitted the sweater I'm wearing here, so I was very fashionable for the celebration. Spring also means a renewed interest in time outdoors. Nella and I both love to walk and hike, so we started occasional visits to nearby national parks. This is Repovesi, about 2 hours drive from Helsinki, and it quickly became one of my favorite national parks that I had visited up until that point. Finland is quite flat overall, but there are some areas of hills, and Repovesi luckily does have a few peaceful viewpoints. National parks in Finland are free to enter and enjoy. In parks and trails of all kinds, you can often find fire pits. Finland is very good about providing these. And Finns love to cook sausage and other foods on the fire when out for a hike. Here, Nella and I have prepared cheese-stuffed mushrooms. And often firewood is stored near the pit in a dry hut, making the fire easier to start as well. Repovesi has a unique hand pulley ferry to cross the lake. It was a real workout, I'll tell you. I think maybe the wind was pushing against me. That'll be my excuse anyway. But I think Nella was looking at me and probably just like, oh, why aren't we going any faster? But eventually we did cross, and it was a lot of fun. And my arms were sore the next day. Finland is a country of rock and heavy metal. There are about 50 metal bands for every 100,000 inhabitants, more than any other country in the world. Nella and I went to Rockfest, a 3-day festival featuring many bands, both Finnish and foreign. I had never been to anything like this before, so it was a new experience for me. The famous band Scorpions was one of the highlights. I can't say that rock or metal are necessarily my favorite music genres, but some of the bands I enjoyed a lot. And while not every Finn loves rock per se, it's definitely a popular genre in the country. On June 12th, Helsinki celebrates Helsinki Day. The esplanade is closed to traffic, and residents have a shared picnic along a seriously long table. It was so much fun for us to bring a sandwich and sit down with the locals in appreciation of their great city. Nella is a student of veterinary medicine in her final year, and this past summer, she took a job as a temporary veterinarian in the town of Pitipudas. So we packed our little car and drove the 5 hours to northern central Finland. This car is a manual, so this summer I happily learned how to drive a stick shift for the first time. Finland is gradually, particularly in newer cars, going over to automatics, but it's happening a bit more slowly, of course, than the dramatic change that has happened over the years in the United States, but it will undoubtedly continue in that direction now. Piti-Pudas, with a few thousand people, is a very small community. Residents refer to it as the village. My Finnish friends were very surprised to hear I was moving to this town. I think I was probably the only American anywhere around. Now, one thing to note are the mosquitoes here. When we arrived in mid-June, they were unbelievable. I have never seen anything like it. They are a bit larger than the typical mosquitoes I think we have in Washington state, at least, and they were plentiful in number. In fact, it begs the question of how helpful all that swinging I did back in Latvia really was, but maybe that just works on Latvian mosquitoes, I don't know. But anyway, going out in midday helped, and by August, the mosquitoes were fewer in number. And urban Finland, Helsinki in particular, has far fewer mosquitoes. I don't know if I saw a single mosquito in Helsinki, so the contrast is quite dramatic. But Finland is a country of many lakes and marshes, a very good environment for mosquitoes, so I suppose it's not that surprising. Piti-Pudas has a charming church, a few parks, a grocery store, a gym, and a couple of shops. The level of English comprehension here was a bit lower than I expected, and certainly lower than Helsinki, but many people knew at least some English, so I managed okay. We took day trips to the nearby national park, Salmijärvi. Finland, as I said, is a country of lakes. I think it has 190 or 200,000 lakes. Like its Nordic neighbors, Finland has a law regarding every person's right, allowing residents and visitors to traverse the terrain as they wish, with just a few limits. This is Rokkua National Park, closer to Oulu, just south of Lapland. We actually wanted to camp in a tent here, but the mosquitoes were concerning us, or intimidating us, shall I say. So we stayed in a hotel nearby. We'll try camping another time, I hope. Finally, smaller national park, Pyhähäki, which had excellent berries, blueberries and the rarer cloudberries. And cloudberries are what you use to make the jam for leipäjuusto. Speaking of berries, summer brings a relatively short but beloved strawberry harvest in Finland. These strawberries are deep red and full of flavor. Nella and I went picking in July and took home literally several pounds. Another day, we pre-ordered several more pounds that the strawberry farm had picked for us. Regardless of where you are in Finland, I think, in July, you should come across local strawberries. The cities, including Helsinki, sell them in many places, including on Kauppatori, the main market square we saw earlier. I made Nella mansikkakaku, Finnish strawberry cake, using the berries we picked for her birthday. Very good, light, refreshing cake. Blueberries are truly everywhere in Finnish nature. They are a deep blue-purple and have a fantastic flavor. I went picking several times and took home a nice bowl full each day. This is a wonderful, popular activity in the Finnish summer, and I felt so in touch with the landscape, at peace. It was great. With blueberries, I suggest you make mustikka parakka, a blueberry pie, and serve it with a large dose of vanilla sauce. This is probably my favorite Finnish dessert. I made 3 or 4 of these over the course of the summer. Finns are huge consumers of ice cream, particularly in the summer, of course, when it's warmer. Some studies show Finns eat the most ice cream per capita of any European country, although some other studies dispute this. But I can attest that they are very strong ice cream eaters from about June to August. Jatski Auto, that you see here, is an ice cream truck company that serves communities throughout Finland. And even in rural Piti-Pudas, they visit every couple of weeks, traversing the different neighborhoods in the town. Nella and I couldn't help but get a few flavors, a few boxes. One unique Finnish flavor is salmiakki and vanilla ice cream. Salmiakki is a salty licorice, which similar to what you see in other countries in Northern Europe, I think. But the combination with the sweet vanilla kind of helps temper it a little bit. It's very delicious. Finns love their salmiakki. Late summer and fall now is a time for mushrooms in Finland, and boy, they are really delicious. We got these chanterelles in a market, not exactly having the energy or the time to go pick them ourselves. Blueberries are literally everywhere in Finland, but chanterelles are a little harder to find, and if you don't know where they grow year after year, it's not as obvious where they might be. My final big experience before leaving Finland in mid-August, just over 1 month ago, was bringing little Eppu home. Nella has always loved dogs and wanted her own pup. Standard poodles in particular interested her. So she surprised me one day by saying a breeder 4 hours away had offered her a puppy. So we drove there, and little Eppu won us over with his kindness and playful personality. So now he's a little bit bigger, and he's growing into an older puppy. And at the end of October, I have the pleasure of being able to visit Nella in Helsinki and little Eppu too for a couple of weeks, which I'll really enjoy. So that, my friends, is a quick snapshot of my last year in just about an hour. Together, we celebrated Latvian Easter, explored St. Petersburg's imperial past, and joined Finns in overalls to celebrate the coming of spring and another year of independence. This year will be their 105th year in the coming December. So I'm just incredibly grateful to share this experience with all of you. You know, Finland and the Baltics are not the most popular destinations, but they are fantastic and worthy of your attention. I think they exemplify Europe through the back door. So thanks so much for joining us, and I'd like to turn it back over to Gabe. Hi, Gabe.
Hi, Ben. Thank you so much again for an incredible presentation. I mean, you and I have chatted a bit about your trip, but tonight's the first time I feel like I'm getting a full sense of it. I was telling you earlier that I love doing Monday Night Travel because I learn about new places that I want to go. And during your presentation, I pulled up a Google tab and typed in Riga, and I'm now like planning a trip that will involve Riga. So we have a lot of great questions for you, Ben. Before we get to those, though, can we have a quick word from our sponsor?
Absolutely, Gabe. Our sponsor tonight is our excellent radio show. You know, Rick sticks to mainly Europe in the television show and our tours, but for the radio show, Rick goes to new destinations, both in Europe and beyond. So it's a great resource. And in fact, Julianne has kindly placed some links to past radio shows in the chat, which are relevant to the places that we visited here today. So check out our radio show.
So Ben, our first question tonight comes from Susan, and Susan wants to know, why were you interested in studying Russian culture in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question, Susan. Thanks so much for asking it. Well, there's a couple of origins, I would say, to it. Firstly, I mentioned my friend, Kira Petrovskaya-Wayne, who was a nurse and sniper in Siege of Leningrad. As a child, I would visit her, and she was from a Russian noble family. She had this original portrait of Catherine the Great in her library, and I would sit with her. You know, she was in her 90s already, and she had a mind that was still sharp, with memories back to Stalin's purges in the 30s and even earlier than that. So the dramatic stories and the Russian culture that she presented to me was really inspiring. That was one source. The second source is my family history. My grandfather's family is from central Western Ukraine. It was part of the Russian Empire for quite a long time. And today that area is very much Ukrainian speaking and ethnic Ukrainian. But at the time, that sort of sense of that national sense didn't really exist, at least not as strongly as it does today. So learning about the history and nation building of this entire region has always interested me. And of course, the role of Russia as an imperial entity has always fascinated me greatly.
And Ben, you kind of mentioned speaking a little bit of Finnish and a little bit more Russian. And we had Marie, who was wondering how you're learning those languages or how you have learned them.
Well, Russian, I think, is easier than Finnish. Maybe some people would disagree. I don't think you should be intimidated by the alphabet. Once you get the hang of it, it's no problem, really. But Russian, I took a course at University of Washington several years ago as an undergraduate, and then I continued studying it in St. Petersburg. So my Russian skill is not advanced at all. I would say lower intermediate, and I haven't been maintaining it very well, so it's slipping a little bit. So it'll be up to me to try to find the motivation. Finnish is even lower, in part because Finns are very good English speakers. In Piti-Pudas, that's not completely true, but in cities, very, very high level of English overall. And when I try to say a word in Finnish to start out a conversation, instant switch to English, and that's kind of the end of it. So it can be a little challenging, I think, in that regard, to learn Finnish when you're in the country. Whereas in St. Petersburg, English level is more hit and miss for sure. Tourist-oriented places like certain restaurants and so on. Yeah, those folks probably speak English, but otherwise, either it's sign language or you're gonna speak Russian. So Finnish level is much lower, but that's the one I'm working on now.
And Ben, the Russian people, did you find that they were fairly friendly and open to conversation with a foreigner, or were they a little bit more kind of aloof and introverted?
I think before you get to know Russians, they appear a bit more introverted or a little bit cold, but some of that is just culture, because they would say the way Americans smile so easily is a little unnatural. I mean, that's kind of their opinion anyway. We're always having big smiles, and they might ask, what's so great? But once you start talking to the Russian people in general, they are very kind and they are very, very friendly.
And did you get a sense, were you able to talk to any Russians about their thoughts on the conflict with Ukraine? Do you have a sense of kind of what public opinion was on that, at least within St. Petersburg?
It was difficult to get a sense of that. St. Petersburg is a city that where there is some opposition to Putin and the invasion of Ukraine. There's no doubt about that. But understanding, the margins of that are difficult. And of course, polling, people don't always answer truthfully because they might be afraid of, for their opinion getting out there. So I did have a few conversations, but they were very limited. And Russian political culture is quite different than in the US or Western Europe. People are often just focused on what's going on at home, and they may not want to say in public necessarily, how they're feeling. I think if you really get to know a Russian, then, of course, they'll be more likely to share. But I wouldn't say that their opinions on things like that would necessarily naturally come out as easy as the political opinions would in other countries.
Ben, Robert was wondering, we heard how you got out of the country, but your friends and classmates, how did they get out of Russia and where did they end up going?
Yeah, well, there were still flights, and I think there are still flights, and some Russians are taking them now, to Istanbul in the South Caucasus. So you could go that route and then go to Europe. So it's not like all gates were closed. It just got a little bit more difficult. And as far as, the closest places from St. Petersburg, that would be Estonia and Finland. They couldn't take the train because the Allegro train was limited to Russians and Finns. But there were still some buses from St. Petersburg to Tallinn. So several of my classmates left St. Petersburg via the bus to Tallinn. And my understanding is they were held up at the border for a number of hours, and they were searched more seriously by Russian authorities when they exited, but they were allowed to leave.
And so, we know how you got out, and you said that you continued your studies virtually while you were in Finland. Did you finish your master's degree?
I did, yes. Great question, Gabe. Yeah, I'm really glad to be finished with it. A few weeks ago, I turned in my thesis, which was really fascinating topic, I think, anyway. It's on Intourist, which was the Soviet conglomerate, the Soviet company that managed foreign tourists and tried to control visits of foreign tourists in the Soviet Union. One of their goals was a political one, so to speak. It was to improve perceptions of the regime among these visitors in hopes that back home, this would kind of proliferate out a little bit and opinions of the regime would soften a bit. So my thesis was about sort of trying to answer the question, how successful was Intourist in this endeavor? And there were a variety of personal accounts I used, travel memoirs and so on, as well as some excellent surveys done in the 1960s, one of them by a PhD student at Yale University, which interviewed and surveyed hundreds of American travelers to the Soviet Union, both before and after their trip, in order to get a sense of, how their impressions changed, did they improve, and so on. So it really excellent topic, and I really enjoyed the research for it.
It's fascinating how, Rick talks about travel as a political act, and so often that's about us as travelers broadening our perspective and taking home these new ideas. But it's interesting that in certain places and points in history, governments have been very careful about the ideas they want you to take home. So would you say that today's Russian government is also aware of that and kind of tries to control visitors' vision of their country, or not so much these days?
Not so much, I would say. Yeah. Tourism to Russia, other than some sort of visa and bureaucratic paperwork components, is quite different from in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, there were large tracts of the country where foreigners couldn't visit. They were closed off. And today, those places are either much smaller or non-existent. There's military facilities and so on that, foreigners are not supposed to enter. But for the most part, it's a much more open country. And there isn't the kind of guidance and control that there was in the Soviet period. In the Soviet period, you had to submit an itinerary, and that itinerary had to be approved. And you could only stay at certain hotels and visit certain restaurants. Whereas today, you can, of course, go to any hotel, you can go to any restaurant. You don't have to have a guided tour by some Intourist, employed guide. So it's very different in that regard, much more open.
Ben, we have a couple questions about your time in Finland. We have Curtis who's wondering, do you feel like, how are Finnish towns or cities, how do they feel distinct from towns and cities in other countries in that area, in Scandinavia and the Baltics? What kind of makes them unique, in your opinion?
Well, I think it depends a little bit on the city or the town. Helsinki, especially downtown, as I mentioned, the core has very old buildings from 19th century, and these were constructed sort of with a Russian kind of influence and under Russian control. So there's a lot of neoclassicism among the oldest buildings in Helsinki, and that's the Russian influence again. Other cities and towns, it really varies a lot, I think. You have cities like Jyväskylä, which have grown a lot in the last 50 years. Jyväskylä is a city in central Finland. It's grown a lot in the last 50 years, so it has sort of more contemporary architecture. On the west coast of Finland, there are older towns which are even older than Helsinki, and cities like Turku. Turku was the capital of Finland before Russia moved it to Helsinki in 1812. So there's more wooden architecture and wooden buildings in some of these places that harkens back, further into the past. I would say that, Sweden probably has some of these as well, since these are from the era of Finland's control, or of Sweden's control of Finland. So it's complex, I would say. I would say the architecture in Finland is very diverse, and it varies a lot from one town or city to the other.
Then we have time for two more questions. First, I have a very hard-hitting one for you. It comes from Clement, and Clement wants to know, what does a cloudberry taste like?
Not like a cloud. Well, I've never tasted a cloud, so I can't quite say it doesn't taste like a cloud. It's sweet and tart, I would say, and it's orange. So when you look up a cloudberry, you'll see, okay, it's orangish yellow. and it's sweet and tart. I'm not quite sure how I could describe it. Kind of tangy. It's very good. It's popular, and I think you can find it here. I mean, of course, I am from Paulsbo, which is a town west of Seattle, which has Scandinavian and Nordic roots. So I can find a lot of things from Finland here. But in a specialty supermarket, you might be able to come across cloudberry jam.
Interesting. I'll have to look for it. And Ben, one last question for tonight. I'm sure, you've learned a lot in the past year. You've passed on a lot of those lessons to us, but I'm curious whether from your studies or your travels or just your experience having to flee a country, what is one of the biggest lessons that you've taken away from this past year?
Oh, Gabe, that's a difficult question. I thought you were going to hit me with the cloudberry question. That was going to be the difficult one, but you've saved it for me here. I wish I had like 5 minutes to come back. You know how in class the teacher lets you step away for a minute and think. Ultimately, I would say the humanity, limited differences ultimately between people, everyday people in Russia, everyday people in Finland. Because, I was there for quite some time, 4 months in St. Petersburg and 7 months. And if you include all my visits, probably I'm getting close to a year in Finland altogether. And sure, there are cultural differences, but people are still people. They have so many of the same wishes and desires. And so, especially now, as there's sort of a new little iron curtain forming again between Russia and, much of the rest of the world. I think it is important to remember that Russians are people too, just like Finns and Americans. And, mostly we just want a happy and stable life.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to curate all of those experiences and put together such a thoughtful and carefully planned presentation for us tonight. It was really, really excellent. And we're so glad that you are back, not just to give us a great presentation, but that you'll continue joining us in Monday Night Travel, including next week. I believe you'll be hosting alongside Rick, or you'll be moderating while Rick hosts a show on October 3rd about the art of Europe. Rick will be discussing his new European art mini-series, which will be airing on public television beginning in October. So thank you again, Ben, and we will see you next week.
Thanks so much, Gabe. This was really an honor and a great pleasure. Thank you to Julianne for your help tonight, and to all of our guests. I'm so honored and grateful to be able to share this experience with you. Thank you for helping me relive it in my head, or at least some of it.
Of course, Ben. Anytime. Happy to relive it. Thank you again to Ben for such a great travel log, and we hope that you all will join us next week. Good night, Ben.
Uva uota, Gabe. Good night. Good night to you, Julianne.
Good night, Gabe. Good night, Ben.
Good night, Julianne. Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.